The Arrowverse has 20 seasons, each with its own main villain. In these seasons, the main hero and the main villain tend to form some sort of rivalry in which they fight quite a lot, and the rivalry and the fight scenes kind of have to start somewhere, which is what I'm looking at in this video. The first time the main hero and the main villain ever fought ranked from worst to best. Now, as a huge note, this video will not be including anything from Legends of Tomorrow, and the reason for that is it's kind of a little bit difficult to distinguish what the first fight is for these hero and main villains, because since the main heroes are a group of superheroes, what do I count? Like any one of the members fighting the main villain, or is it the entire team fighting the main villain? And sometimes, usually for this show, I mean every single time basically, it's the first fight, it's barely a fight or anything. So because of all those reasons, I just decided to not include Legend of Tomorrow in this list, just looking at the single hero, single villain rivalries in Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl, starting with number 16. Supergirl doesn't tend to have very good fight scenes. It's just one thing in the huge amount of things they just don't do right. They just don't understand. And this is especially true for everything really in Season 1. The first fight between Supergirl and Non was not a very good first fight for a main villain and a main hero. It was like in a cliffhanger between episode 8 and 9. And at the time, we didn't even know that Non was the main villain, so it wasn't very climactic at all. And that's not even to say that the fight was not good. Again, the show doesn't do fight scenes very well, like between two superpowered Kryptonians. It just looks so bad every single time, or at least most of the time. There is one that I'll get later into this list that isn't necessarily bad at all, but here between Supergirl and Non, it's a pretty bad fight scene through and through, and because of that, this and a couple other seasons of Supergirl's first fights will be right at the bottom of this list.
The kryptonite doesn't have much effect on.
So like I said, Supergirl is going to be at the bottom of this list quite a lot, and here we have the Season 2 main villain Rhea fighting Supergirl. Season 2 is only a little bit better than Season 1 in the fight scenes as well, but this is not really much better than the placement at number 16. It's still really, really bad. It looks stupid, it's poorly choreographed. The CGI here and everything to do with this fight and just the rivalry between Supergirl and Rhea doesn't help it at all either. This is not a very good fight, not a very good start to their rivalry, or at least for their fight scenes in general, putting it pretty low on the list as well.
You have powers?
I have powers.
Despite the fact that Lex Luthor is a pretty good villain, he did have like two flaws, one of them being that he didn't appear very much, and the other being his fight scenes with Supergirl looked pretty bad. The first fight here in episode 16 of Season 4, it looks really stupid. It's the reveal that Lex Luthor has powers, but still, even though that reveal is actually kind of cool, there's nothing really there to this fight at all. I think that parts of it look really bad CGI-wise. The part where he's picking up the Daily Planet thingy, it just looks really, really, really bad. And as such, it's not a very good first fight between Supergirl and Lex Luthor. And that sucks because Lex Luthor is a great villain in this season.
Brother.
This fight is not necessarily poorly choreographed at all. I think that it isn't terrible, but it is 100% ruined by the acting from the actress who plays Amiko Queen, C. Shimuka. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but anyway, the actress is 100% a garbage actress in this scene and in the season in general. She's terrible. It really takes me out of the fight, and I can't really take anything that's happening here seriously. On top of that, I can't really take it seriously because Amiko shouldn't be a physical threat to Oliver at all. And because of all those things, this is not a very good fight between Oliver and Amiko at all. It's completely ruined by the acting. I think the choreography is fine, but it's just not enough to hold up this first fight between the main hero and the main villain, where the main villain feels like a non-threat, and also the actress who's playing her is pretty terrible.
you got?
The first fight between Oliver Queen and Damien Darhk isn't terrible necessarily. Like the part where he shoots the arrows at Darhk and he stops them, that was probably the peak of how cool his powers were. Like, that was pretty cool. And then from there on out, it got tiring. It's more tiring and more tiring, and it really didn't work. But for this first fight between Oliver and Darhk, it wasn't necessarily terrible at all. I think the fight scene here isn't bad. I think the choreography also isn't bad at all. It just definitely doesn't hold up to the rest of Arrow's first fights, obviously, except for in Season 7. I don't know if I should really consider this to be a fight, because it's really just Barry holding on to DeVoe's chair while DeVoe's trying to chase him off. But considering this is the first physical confrontation between Barry and DeVoe, I guess that's what I'm going to count here. And because of that, it's actually not bad at all. I think that visually looks pretty cool. The season in general is, in my opinion, the best looking season of The Flash, and this is definitely an example of that. I think the colors and the CGI, it definitely looks pretty cool. It's a good looking scene. I think that the rivalry between Barry and DeVoe definitely enhances the scene quite a bit. Like, their interactions in this episode worked really well to lead up to this confrontation. It's definitely not an incredible first fight or anything, but I definitely think it's not bad at all. And I really wanted to see more fight scenes between Barry and DeVoe, maybe a little bit similar to this over the course of the season, because really we didn't really get anything like it. It's pretty weird that Oliver and Diaz didn't fight until episode 20 of the season, but that is the case. This first fight between Oliver and Diaz definitely has some good parts to it. I think that the choreography is pretty good. I think that it has definitely an intensity to it that works really well for the episode. The problem here is the fact that Diaz shouldn't be a physical threat to Oliver at all, and the fact that Oliver doesn't have his weapons is the only reason why Diaz was able to win, because I guess he technically cheated. I still think that even with that, Oliver should have won easily, so this fight definitely makes Oliver look a little bit less badass than he typically is, or than he could be, but it's still a pretty good fight choreography-wise, intensity-wise, and I don't hate it at all. As the first fight between Diaz and Oliver, I think that the first fight should have been a lot earlier in the season, like before the mid-season finale, and Diaz should have been the main villain before then, and also Diaz should have been a lot better of a fighter, but still, this isn't necessarily terrible. Cicada version 2's introduction in Season 5 is definitely not a bad one at all. In fact, it is pretty great. This scene visually looks pretty great. It's honestly one of the best looking scenes of the season. That's not really saying much, because I think Season 5 doesn't look nearly as good as Season 4. A large part of that is because of Flash's costume, but I think that still, this is a pretty good looking scene all together. I also think that's a very refreshing scene. Like, it makes this new Cicada look so much more badass, so much more powerful, and a much bigger threat, an actual threat compared to the original Cicada that we have been seeing for a while now get defeated pretty easily by Barry, Caitlin, and even Iris. So this was definitely a refreshing look at Cicada with her introduction. So I think it's actually a pretty good first fight between Cicada and Team Flash, or Barry. The fight between Supergirl and Reign in Season 3's mid-season finale is probably the best superhero/supervillain fight in the entirety of Supergirl, which isn't saying a lot, but it's enough to put it at number 8 on this list. This fight is actually pretty good. I think that it definitely looks a lot better than the rest of Supergirl's first fights between the main hero and the main villain. I think it has a level of intensity to it that none of those fights did, and it's basically a lot more intense than most fights on this list, even some fights that are maybe even a little bit higher than this one. they just look better, or they are better in general, but this is definitely very intense, and that's what really carries this fight scene, putting it at a lot higher on this list than the rest of its peers from Supergirl. This scene, it looks undoubtedly great. The CGI here, it looks really, really good. Now, I definitely think that it is definitely something we've seen before, which is why it's lower on the list than those other two fights. Flash versus Reverse Flash, Flash versus Zoom, and now here Flash versus Savitar, where they appear pretty early on into the season and just kick Flash's ass, where he thinks he's the fastest man alive, turns out he's not, so that's why it's a little bit lower. It's something we've seen before, but still, it undoubtedly looks really cool. I think it lacks the level of intensity that maybe the other two fights have, which we will see later on this list, but still, it looks incredible, which is why it's so high on the list. The first fight between Oliver and Merlin in the mid-season finale of Arrow Season 1 was pretty cool. I think that it was very well choreographed. I really like the Archer aspect to it, where they wanted to see which one's better. And that was a small part of it in the beginning, but I really like that. I think that it definitely has a level of intensity to it that really, really works. I think it's like the first time in the season we see Oliver get his ass kicked. It's like, up until now, he's been this crazy, unstoppable badass, and now Merlin comes around and kicks his ass, so that's definitely something that really, really worked for the flow of the season, and really worked to kickstart their rivalry, making this a pretty good first fight, actually a pretty great first fight between the main hero and the main villain, which this was actually the first one ever.
I don't know who you are.
But you do, Barry. We've been at this a long time, you and I, but I'm always one step ahead.
This is the first of many speedster fights we would see on The Flash, not counting the flashbacks to what we saw in when Barry was a little kid. That doesn't really count because it's not much of a speedster fight. We don't really get to see anything until later. Anyway, this is the first of the speedster fights we would see, and I love speedster fights. I think it's really one of the best parts of The Flash, and this is still one of the best ones to date. It looks really cool. The rivalry here between Reverse Flash and Barry really enhances the fight scene in general. It really enhances the speedster race. The scene really establishes Reverse Flash as the threat he is, and how much more powerful or faster he is compared to Barry, which is something we've seen a lot since. But I think that since this is the first time we ever saw it, it obviously really worked, so much that they did it 2 more times. One time it actually worked even better in terms of the first fight, which we will see later in this list, but I think this fight scene is definitely good enough to make it into the top 5. This fight was a great start to a great rivalry. It starts with this awesome shot of the Green Arrow shooting an arrow at Prometheus, who then counters with a shuriken, or a throwing star, whatever you want to call it, and it looks awesome. And then what follows is a pretty brutal and intense fight scene that is incredibly well choreographed. I absolutely love the fight scenes in this season. It's probably the best season in the Arrowverse in terms of fight scenes, and I don't really mean probably, I mean definitely. That is definitely what I think, and this is definitely one of those great fight scenes, one of the best ones in this season. It looks so cool. It's definitely really intense. There's a really high sense of brutality to it. And I just love the way they use the camera in these fight scenes in this season, making this one of the best first fights between the main hero and the main villain in the Arrowverse, putting it at number 4.
Don't forget who taught you how to fight, kid.
I don't love the fact that Oliver and Slade didn't go head-to-head until episode 19 out of 23 in the present day in Season 2, but I guess looking at the season, looking at my opinion and the audience in general's opinion on the season, I guess here it definitely worked, but this, I think, is an incredible fight scene. It's incredibly well choreographed. I loved how they used, basically the same weapons that Slade taught Oliver how to use in the Season 1 flashbacks. I'm pretty sure it was, unless it was definitely Season 1 flashbacks, and they're basically using the same thing. This fight scene, I think, looks incredible, and it definitely serves to show how much more powerful Slade is compared to Oliver and how much more physically capable he is in a fight. And I just think in general this is an incredible first fight between Oliver and Slade. Again, I don't love that it is so late in the season for the first fight, but again, also it still worked, and it is a great fight scene. The Climb, which is where this fight scene takes place, is one of the highest rated episodes of Arrow, which is something I don't really understand. I don't think this episode is that good, but one part of it that is pretty damn good is this fight between Oliver and Raish, which I guess is why it's so highly rated, or at least partially why. I think this fight is incredible. I love the fact there's no music in the background. It really enhances the scene. The choreography here is great. It's definitely really, really intense and brutal, and I think it works really, really well. The rivalry between Oliver and Raish definitely went downhill from here, and the badassery of Ra's al Ghul and the season in general went downhill from here immensely, but this is where the season peaked in this fight scene, and this was such a great first fight between the main hero and the main villain, putting it at number 2 on this list. Similar to The Climb, Enter Zoom, which is the fight... Similar to The Climb, Enter Zoom, which is the episode this fight scene takes place in, is also one of the highest rated episodes of its respective show, in this case The Flash, and in this case also I 100% understand why. This first fight between The Flash and Zoom is probably the most intense scene in the entirety of the Arrowverse, or maybe the second intense scene after I Wanted to and I Liked It in Season 5 of Arrow, but this is maybe probably the second most intense scene in the Arrowverse. It's so damn intense. It serves to show how much more powerful Zoom was than Barry at the time, and it works so well. This is definitely something that they've done before once, but still, it worked again really well the second time around, even better in their first fight, as this is an incredibly intense fight with such a great feel to it in terms of the beginning of the rivalry between Barry and Zoom. It's so good. Zoom in general is such a great villain, and his scariness as a whole served to create the best first fight between a main hero and a main villain in the entirety of the Arrowverse, putting this fight between The Flash and Zoom in number 1 on this list. So anyway, that is the end of this list. Let me know what your list is in the comments down below, and if you have any other ideas for rankings in the Arrowverse, or even maybe something outside of the Arrowverse, like maybe the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.